All right, let's do it. Let's update to 1.21.3. Alright, we found back in channel once more, and in this tutorial we'll be updating our project over here, the NeoForge tutorial project 1.21.1 to 1.21.3. Please note, disclaimer at the very beginning, I still recommend you do not update. I will go through this with you. We'll go through the update to 0.3. We'll go through the update to 0.4 in another video and to 0.5 in another video. However, I still recommend you stick with 1.21.1 as it is currently the de facto modded version where most big mods sort of reside. Most big mod packs have chosen this version as the update process is very involved, as you can clearly see by the length of this video. Now, if you still want to go through with this, that's fine. I still highly recommend you, well, either make a new branch on your GitHub repository or you duplicate the project because, like I said, 1.21.1 will probably be the de facto version for modding until 1.22 comes out, whenever that might be. And how do we update? Well, to do this, of course, we can simply have our project over here and we can go to our Gradle properties file and change a couple of things. And these couple of things are, involved-ish, let's say. Let's take a look. So we can go to the NeoForge project listing over here. We can change the version to, well, 1.21.3, and we can see that the current latest version is 21.3.76. That is roughly what I have here as well. So we're going to change that to 21.376. There we go. The parchment version is 21.3, and then this is going to be for the 7th of December right here. That's fine. We also want to change the Minecraft version to 0.3. Here, we're going to change the Minecraft version to 0.6. Reason being, this is non-exclusive, meaning that every time we look for what Minecraft version we're using, we're basically saying it has to at least be 1.21 inclusive and 1.21.6 exclusive. So any Minecraft version between 1.21 and 1.21.5 would be sort of as you can see, allowed to be used. You can also literally just put it into 1.21.3 and 1.21.4, then only 1.21.3 would work, which, you know, in theory, with this larger project, probably makes sense to do that. Similar thing with the NeoForge version. If you want to make sure that people use the exact version here, we can simply do this, and then you're going to be fine. That should be okay. The next thing, JEI, well, crazily enough, if we go to the build.gradle file, we have to remove JEI because it doesn't exist in 1.21.3 and above. We literally have to delete it because it doesn't work, right? There's no version for this. Another indication that maybe moving to something like 1.21.3 and above is not the best idea. I think this is almost everything in the build.gradle file at the very top over here. If we're using a mod dev, I believe we want to update to 21. And when we do that, I believe we also have to open the Gradle folder in the Gradle properties file. Let me double check over here in my notes. We don't actually have to update this. That's going to be fine. And that's going to be okay. I think that is it. So, of course, here we have the Neo version, the Minecraft version, the change in the mappings, the parchment, and then here basically making sure that the that JEI is commented out, and then what we can do is load Gradle changes, and in theory, it should download everything and update our project to 1.21.3. Of course, it's going to take anywhere from a couple of seconds to a minute or so, or maybe even longer, depending on all sorts of different things, how fast your PC is and all of that. Just let it run through, and when we get a build successful, then we will continue from there on and try to go through all of the errors. Oh my. All right, we got a build successful in 39 seconds. Like I said, sometimes can be quite fast, sometimes can be quite slow. And what we're going to do is we're literally going to go through every single class from top to bottom with the exception of one thing, and that is in the compat over here. We can immediately literally just, in theory, delete the compat folder because JEI no longer exists. You can also take the classes and just move them outside of your project. I'm just going to choose to delete them completely because, like I said, JEI hasn't updated, so we can't have any compatibility with it in this instance. Continuing with this, we have the blocks. So let's just go through each of the different blocks over here. We discover in the chair block over here, we have the mod spawn type. Right, we can take a look. Okay, this no longer exists. Probably changed its name. How can you figure out what it changed it to? Well, I can literally just put in triggered, and it's actually going to tell me this should be entity spawn reason, or I can also go into the spawn method. So control left click on this, and we can see the class is now named entity spawn reason. So this would be one of the ways that you can find this, and I can then literally just put this in, and the error is fixed. there is of course, the import here is still there. You can simply press Control, Alt, and O to delete the imports that are no longer needed. And there we go. First 2 classes done. And we're going to continue over here. The interaction result no longer has the cited success. It now only has the success, I'm pretty sure. So it's only going to be success. That's going to be okay. Basically totally fine. And we can keep it like that. Grove chamber block. The item interaction result has changed into the interaction result, I'm pretty sure. So this is basically just a change in the class. And here, once again, the cited success doesn't exist. Only the success there exists. There you go. And there we go. The way to figure that one out is, in theory, to remove the class. And if I were to, once again, type this out, use item on, you can see that it now suggests to me the interaction result. So that's basically how you would get that. And that's most of the time how you get it. There are also other ways. All of this wouldn't be possible without, number one, the NeoForge guide over here. This is a more or less like an easy guide, and then also the primer. This probably is the best thing ever. So this is the primer from 1.21 to 1.21.2. However, it works in 0.3 as well, because the changes from 0.2 to 0.3 are basically not even important. And you can see, if I were to scroll, I'm just going to scroll fast. Yeah. These are all of the changes, like literally, like basically every single thing, right? Like this has changed into this. So it is very, very thorough. Highly, highly recommended to check out both of those if you are stuck on anything that I don't show you. I will link those in the description below, of course. Magic block is fine. Mod float flammable rotating pillar block is fine. The sapling block is fine. The pedestal block has the same issue that we've seen previously, so that should be very straightforward to fix that. You're literally just changing the item interaction result to the interaction result. There we go. And the radius is also fine. So all of the block classes are now done. And then we get to the entity rendering. All is well. Block entity. There is one thing down here with the recipe manager. This one is, if I recall correctly, actually really simple. I don't know why, sometimes or all of the time, I don't know quite why or how they changed these things. But there is a thing, and that is, let me just double check over here. So this is going to be, instead of this, we basically now have to cast the level into the server level, which we know we're on. That's going to be fine. And then we can call the recipe access over here. And this is on the server level. Recipe access is going to be the recipe manager, right? So that's going to be fine. And the reason why we can simply cast this to a server level is the get current recipe is called in the has recipe method as well as in the craft item method. And both of those inside the tick method will only ever be called on the server. So you have to make sure that your tick method is server only. The way to make sure that this is the case is in your block class for your block entity. In this case, the Grove Chamber block. You can see that its client is going to be null, so we're not actually calling the ticker there. That is why we can basically do that and simply cast it to a server level without checking before. So keep that in mind. But yeah, that's the one thing. And then in the pedestal, there is nothing. Mod block entities, the builder has changed. Correct. So instead of all of this craziness, we're now making a new block entity type. This is going to be a new block entity type. And then we no longer need this build and the null over here. And that's it. Basically, making this a little bit easier. New block entity type, and then getting rid of the build right here. And there we go. That is going to be the block entities done. And then we get to the mod blocks. And now fun things start. Why do I say fun things start? Well, because every block, right, when it is registered, obviously we are giving it a name, but now in the properties, we need to call the setID method and give it a resource key. Now, if I were to do this for each one of those, don't copy this right now because we're going to do it in a different way. But in theory, if I did this, I would have to make a resource key create of resource key of a resource key start. No, it's actually resource key dot create for a registries dot block, and then give it a resource location from namespace and path to tutorial.mod.id, and then the same name as I'm giving it here. So all of this information it already has, but I still need to give it again. This is a lot of different words come into mind that I should not say. So what we're gonna do is we're not going to do it like this. We're gonna do it a little bit differently and basically change the register block method a tiny bit, change the register block item method a little bit, and that is going to help us. So instead of using blocks.register, we're going to use blocks.register block over here. And this takes in a function of properties ?b absolutely amazing. So instead of a supplier as the second parameter over here, we're going to change the register block method to a function of block behavior.properties, comma, of type t, and then here function. So do note, right, function of block behavior properties, comma, t, and then this is called the function, and instead of the block, we're going to pass in the function here. Same thing happens in the, or a similar thing happens in the register block item method, but here we're simply going to call the register item method right here, and then instead of the new block item, we're going to say properties dash block item, and then instead of a new block properties here, we're going to say properties dot use block description prefix, and this will also then deal with the rest. But the reason why we can do this is if I go into here, you can see that this uses this function to, well, basically pass it in right here, and then it uses this function to apply the setID method for the deferred register here, in this case for the items, and in the case of the blocks, it does the same thing, func, it passes this in right here, and you can see func apply properties setID. So it basically handles all of this for us. The only thing then is, of course, we now have to change it for every one of our different blocks. But luckily, we can do this semi-fast, let's say, but it still is going to require a little bit of change over here. So what we can do is we can take this, basically the supplier over here, and we're going to change the supplier. So we're going to select this, press Control R to replace it, and we're going to replace it with properties. So inside of the curly, inside of the parentheses, properties, and then new block. That is going to get us, I guess, 2 of them. That's awesome. But I mean, better than nothing. And then we can basically do the same thing for all of the other blocks, because we're going to basically replacing all of those. There's probably going to be a better way to do this. Maybe we can actually just do it like this and then just replacing it. So just the parentheses and then the arrow, replacing that with the properties arrow. But we're going to make sure to go through individually over here, just in case that we're not going to do this on any one that I shouldn't do it on. I think we should be fine. So example, this one, I shouldn't do it on this one. So we're going to continue. See, that is where the replace all would have not worked. Now, all of a sudden, all errors are gone, but we're not done. This is very important, because what we're doing here is we're making new block properties instead of this block. That defeats the entire purpose, and it's not going to work. We now have to take the block properties.of and replace that with just properties. And once again, we're going to go through individually just in case, although I do think that we are going to be fine over here. There you go. And then on ones where there's no properties, you can even like hover over this and replace it with a very simple : new over here. Pretty neat. But yeah, very important that the properties that you add instead of your new block are the properties from the function over here. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And in some instances, the way that this is going to work is it's not going to work. Let's say, for example, for the block sapling over here, because here we're making a full copy of the oak sapling. Now you could say, well, let's just replace it like this. That's not going to work because the of full copy is a static method, and that's not really what you should do. So what I have prepared right here is basically, there's a couple of different things that you can do. You can literally just go into the blocks class of the, let's say, oak sapling right here, and just copy over whatever it has, right? So we're going to go in here and we're going to say oak sapling has, you know, these properties. So map color and all of this jazz right here. We're going to copy this. So I've selected it, press Control C, and we're just going to paste this in, and boom, that's it. Is this the best way to do it? Definitely not. Will this work? Absolutely. Is there another way to copy the properties from another block? I don't think so. That's just, I don't think it is. So that's basically what we're going to do. And I've already prepared this. You've seen this once, right? You can basically go into the blocks class and simply copy that over. And we're going to take the rest over here from my pre-prepared stuff. So this is going to be for the leaves over here. You can see sort of a full copy. We're just going to have all of this stuff here. I just took the sound type of cherry leaves. I thought that those would be a little bit nicer for that. That's going to be okay. The planks, I'm pretty sure, literally don't even have anything. So we can literally just replace this all with the properties over here. That's going to be fine. Then for the goji berry, when we copy this over, it's very important that we change the register method to register block over here. Very important. And the same thing happens in the radish. So register block. And then we can change this up, as you can see, with the map color of the strength and all of that craziness over here. Bismuth lamp, this should all be fine. This is all okay. I believe this should be it. Let me just like sort of scan through one more time, and there we go. Okay, so this is one of the big changes that you have to set the ID. Luckily for us, NeoForge basically covers this with their register block method. Absolutely goated. It is absolutely amazing that this is the case. In theory, we could also work around this with our custom register block and register block item methods. It's not the biggest deal to do it ourselves, but in this case, that's fine. And yes, we will have to do the same thing for the items when we get to the mod items class, but for now, this is all we need in this case. Components. Nothing has changed except here the data components needs a registry key for some reason, even though kind of knows what it is, but that's okay. I believe this is registry keys. No, then it is actually registries dot data component type. There we go. Nothing too crazy. And we can actually close all of this and continue along with data gen. Oh boy. Do we have anything in data gen? The provider for the recipes. Yes. So the recipes is the one big thing that changed, although I think for the better. Let's just go through all of the rest over here, but I'm pretty sure all of the rest is fine. Oh yeah, the data map provider has changed a tiny bit. And that is, I believe we just have a different method, right? Yes. So the gather method now has a holder lookup dot provider over here as a parameter, and that's it. That's gonna fix that issue. The data provider right here also has changed a tiny bit, and that is going to be the add method. Let me see. The reason why this doesn't work is because the trim materials have changed. So this is not to do with the data pack provider, but with the trim materials down below. So we'll be able to fix that in a second when we get to that. Here, the trim materials have just changed place. So basically, they are in a different folder / in a different package. So we're just going to re-import those. And one thing that is also the case, this is in the mod item provider, model provider. That's fine. And the one thing here is, yes, the one thing that doesn't work here is the get equipment slot now needs an item stack, which we don't have in this case. So I delightfully changed this up to, listen, okay, this is not the best way to do it, okay? We're basically literally just saying, hey, the armor item doesn't contain a helmet and it is armor type of helmet. This is not good code, okay? But it is also data gen, and sometimes data gen is just a little bit funky, okay? So we're just going to keep it like this, and we're never going to talk about it again. I think that's fair. Okay, item tags are fine, and then the recipes, oh, those are going to be totally fine as well. Not to worry. First things first, the constructor over here has changed basically completely. The first parameter now is going to be a holder lookup of dot provider. I'm going to call this the provider over here. And then a recipe output. I'm going to call this the recipe output. And those two things are then going to put into the super right here. And that's going to be step 1. Step 2, we need a helper class. This is going to be copied over the runner class. I'm going to call this the my recipes over here. That's going to be totally fine. And inside of the build recipes method, we actually have no recipe output anymore. And then that's going to be fine. And you might ask, well, how are we going to save all of this stuff then? Well, not to worry, because instead of recipe output, we're going to replace this all with output. And once again, making sure we replace this individually right here. Otherwise, it might have an issue. There are going to be some issues. So we're, for example, not going to replace it right here. Very important. And that's going to be fine. There's still a couple of issues, not to worry. So for the slab, for example, we literally just remove the output. So as you can see, those just don't need the outputs for the trim smithing, the wall, and stuff like that. Next question, shapeless, and this and those builders, well, it is now only shape method, shapeless method, nope, shapeless method, there we go, and the shapeless method. That's it, and then this works as well. Finally, or almost finally, the resource location in the trim smithing now also needs a resource key for some reason, because I don't know, I guess don't repeat yourself is apparently not something that we do when we make Minecraft mods. Resource key dot create registries dot recipe, and then putting in the resource location over here, and there we go. That's going to be correct. However, this needs to be a comma and not a dot. And then finally, the ore cooking and stuff like that, we're going to make those non-static, and all of a sudden there should be no more errors in this class. Highly recommended to, of course, check this out in the description below in the GitHub repository. That's going to make this a little bit easier. And instead of making a new recipe provider right here, what we now want to do is actually use the runner. So we're going to say new mod recipe provider dot runner, and then it literally doesn't change anything else. Awesome. That is going to be data gen. Like I said, the data pack provider issue we're going to fix when we get to the trims. Effects, mod effects, nothing. Slime now only takes in a server level right here. It's going to be server level. And of course, we need to also pass this in to the super call of this. And there we go. That's going to be easy as that. Enchantments, I believe if I recall correctly, enchantments have no changes, or I mean, this is not a significant change. This is of course the spawn reason type, spawn entity spawn reason. There you go, entity spawn reason. However, I believe that the enchantments will not work if I recall correctly. I think that that's the one thing that we're sadly going to have to leave behind. Although it might be that this only happens at 1.21.4. I don't know yet. This is listen. There's a lot of different changes here. Okay, and like 3 different versions. So I might not be able to keep everything straight 100% of the time, but that's gonna be okay. And then we get to the one thing that you might already know is absolutely crazy, and that's going to be the entities. And the entities have changed, I mean, in a bit of a way, but mostly they have introduced a new thing. And that new thing is the render state. Now, I don't know how I feel about it, but it is a thing. So we no longer have this resource location over here. This does not exist anymore. And for every entity, we now have, right, in this case, the entity renderer needs an entity, and the second parameter, or the second thing in the generic here, is going to be a render state. In this case, we're going to use the entity render state for this, and we then also need the method. We need a method to override, and that's going to be the create render state method, and this one will simply return a new entity render state. For the chair, well, there's nothing interesting going on, therefore we don't need a custom render state for this. Now, when it comes to the gecko though, right, when we go, so the animations should all be fine. Yes, this is correct. The model is going to change quite significantly because there no longer exists the hierarchical model. It is now an entity model, and the renderer also will change to even more complicated stuff, because what we're going to need in entity client is a new class called the gecko render state. Now, at first I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting, because this will extend from the living entity render state, and it's going to save 2 things. It's going to save the variant as well as the animation state here for the idle animation state. And I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. So that this is no longer a part of the entity. This is now part of the render state. No. It is still part of the entity for some reason. And I don't, okay, sure. I guess that makes sense to dry, right? Don't repeat yourself. Like I said, apparently that does not exist when making Minecraft. Regardless, that's okay. If I sound salty, then that's absolutely because I have been inhaling way too much sodium chloride. I have been in a salt mine for the last, I mean, a lot of time, okay? Since 2021 has been out. It doesn't matter. Okay, let's go. Gecko model, now no longer the great hierarchical model, but is now simply the entity model of type gecko render state. Yes, of gecko render state. The gecko model over here, instead of the constructor, we need to call the super, passing in the root, nothing too crazy. And then down here, the root method no longer exists. Render to buffer method, we can also delete. The apply head rotation method is totally fine, although we need to, actually we don't need to change it in theory. We can just keep it. And then instead of all of this craziness, we're simply going to get the gecko render state. And that's going to be the state. And this then, the head rotation is going to take state.yrot and state.xrot. This is going to be the rotations. Similarly, in the animate walk, we can do render state, or actually the state.walk animation pause. And then here is going to be the state.walk animation speed. And the multiplier is going to stay this way. And instead of using the idle animation from the entity, we now use the idle animation from the state, because that's what we've added in the render state over here. And then agent ticks is, can you guess it? State.agent ticks. Yes. Yeah. So that's basically going to be that. Now you might ask, okay, that's pretty interesting. So the render state sort of has some amount of different things, like the animation state, like the variant over here. And saves then, of course, the living entity render state already has a bunch of different things over here important for rendering a living entity. Now you might ask, Okay, but like how do we do this? Well, now we do this in the renderer over here, mob renderer of type gecko entity of type. The second one is of type gecko render state of type gecko model of type gecko render state, because it wasn't complicated enough before. I absolutely love this. The render method no longer exists for some reason. I mean, it does exist, but now it exists with the render state. And if we were to ask whether or not it's a baby, I don't know if the render state has this. The living one is baby. Do we have this? Is baby actually exists there? Man, I'm amazed. I'm amazed by things like that sometimes. So instead of scaling it here, we can now scale it right here. So instead of using the entity, of course, we're going to use the render state and ask whether or not it's a baby. And there we go. Awesome. The texture location no longer needed. Actually, this is not true. Instead of taking a gecko entity, can you guess what it takes? Of course, a render state. And then we can simply say get variant. Actually, we're just going to take the variant over here because this is just a field. That's going to be okay. The gecko model right here. What is the issue there? I am unsure. This is because we no longer need this to be a generic, actually. Yep, that should be the case, right? Am I crazy? Have I lost my mind? I mean, I have lost my mind, but it is true. We no longer need it to be a generic in theory. And then we can implement the create render state method. And then we actually don't need to do this even. There you go. So it actually is not as crazy as we had it before. There you go. I mean, what a beautiful sight to see. Now, like I said, you might ask, okay, in the create render state method, we're simply going to make a new gecko render state. Now you might say, okay, that's great and all, but like I still haven't set up anything in the render state. Like it doesn't know what the variant is. It doesn't know what the idle animation state is. You're absolutely right. You are absolutely correct. And for that, in the renderer, we're going to call the extract render state method. And this is the point where you call the reused state dot idle animation state dot copy from passing an entity dot idle animation state. And then we say reused variant equal to the entity dot get variant. So instead of using the entity, we are copying from the entity and then using the render state. Listen, I don't claim to know how this works because rendering is also hideously complicated and something that takes a long time to like fully figure out. This still seems absolutely just insane to me. Like, I don't know why they did this. I don't know what benefit this has. But okay, sure, I guess. I'm okay with it, I guess. I mean, we have to be okay with it. Otherwise, we can't mod. So that is just going to be the thing. That is the changes here. And then we continue to the model over here for the Tomahawk, which is going to be an entity render state. In this case, again, entity render state, because we don't have anything fancy going on over here. The constructor, we simply want to call the super, passing in the root. And then here, we're simply changing the setup enum to use the entity render state. Render state. There we go. That's going to be that. Sadly, one tiny thing that will no longer work is the stuff in the render over here will no longer properly work because we don't have access to the entity, and therefore we can't actually, well, do everything that I want to do here, sadly. So while this is going to be fine, and this is going to be the entity render of Tomahawk projectile entity of the entity render state, and then we can simply hover over this to implement the create render state method, where we're simply going to create a new entity render state. Nope, entity render state, actually. Oh, entity renderer. Well, there you go. See, also another one. It's like, this is not render state. It knows exactly what it wants to have there, but it's like, oh, you probably meant the renderer. And no, I did not mean the renderer, my friend. I did not mean the renderer. There we go. And then we can change this up over here to the state. Does it only take in a state? No, it actually just takes in a state and then post stack, and then a buffer, and then pack light. And you can see, okay, so we no longer have the entity right here. So we basically have to, well, change this up quite significantly. This is now the get foil buffer. Then instead of passing anything into the texture location, we're just going to make it override, and then like this. And then this is going to be the state in the super call, and then just like that. So this is going to be how we're going to set this up so that the model is still properly rendered over here. I believe we still need it like this, but there you go. So that's the model as well as the renderer done. And then we can go into the entity classes themselves, the chair entity. Now in the kill method, it is now going to be if we're not on the server. So if we're not on the client side, then we can call the kill method. And that is going to pass in this.level.cast to a server world. And obviously we have to check whether or not we're on the server world. Otherwise it's not going to work. Then we implement the method hurt server. In this case, simply a return false because, well, this particular entity can never be hurt. Not really, like the chair. It doesn't make any sense. So it's the chair entity, the one you sit on. So it doesn't make any sense. In the gecko, there are two changes over here. This is the entity spawn reason instead of the spawn type. And then up here in the level, this now needs to be a server level. I believe, oh, there's a secondary, there's a second thing, right? Yeah, the entity spawn reason, that's going to be breeding. There you go. And there you go. That's going to be the gecko and the chair. And then in the entity over here, is ground is no longer accessible, but because we're not calling it, we can simply get rid of it. And we're going to be okay with that. It's, you know, some things we just have to sort of be okay with. And that's fine. Mod entities, we now need resource keys. I'll copy those over so we can see this is now a resource key of entity type ? And basically instead of the name over here, we're now giving it the key instead of just a name. Highly recommended to make the keys individually because that does make it a little bit easier. Although I don't think you need them anywhere else in this case. Let me double check over here. Nope, you only need them in the building of this. But, you know, still makes it a little bit nicer to read instead of having the resource key stuff in here, in my personal opinion. Then we go on to the events. Let's see, this is fine. This is fine. This is okay. Unless we do need to change the tiniest thing, and that's going to be this is the living damage event for the send system message. So send system message has changed. We can take a look at this. I think it actually only takes in a boolean here, right? Am I crazy? No, I'm not crazy, but it is not the case. Message, display client message. There you go. So this is a component and a boolean. So it has changed its name and also taken in a boolean. That's going to be fine. There you go. That's going to be everything here. Let's close all of the classes that we have done so far, and we continue with the individual item classes. Chisel item is fine. Fuel item has changed. I will have to check this out. Fuel item is now another thing, and that's the fuel values. So we now have the fuel values over here. Fuel values. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what this one is. I just we can just keep it like this, and we're gonna be fine. I'm pretty sure. The hammer. Oh boy. Yes. So the hammer. This is now the tool material instead of a tier, and we also need to change the constructor to take in a float attack damage as well as the float attack speed. And we're going to pass those in after the tags. So this is going to be the attack damage and the attack speed. And that's going to be fine. Control Alt O to delete all of the different imports that we no longer need. And the armor. You know what's beautiful? The armor is going to change. I believe the armor is going to change 3 times in 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5. Really signifying that there is a grand plan at play, right? With these changes. I'll continue to be salty. So now, instead of a holder of armor material, we are just going to have armor material. So you can literally just select this, Control R to change holder of armor material to armor material. We then need to obviously import the correct one. So we're going to delete the import and re-import this. And that's going to be fine. The type here changes to armor type. And down here, instead of getting the material, I have something prepared because, yeah. So the issue is that the armor item doesn't have the material saved on it anymore in a normal way. It now has it saved via a component. Now you might say that's great. It kind of is great, but it needs this craziness. And I'm not even sure if this works. I believe it works in 1.21.3, and then it doesn't work in 0.4, and then it works again in 0.5. Listen, guys, 121. We've done modding since 1.16. Like, I've really been doing it since 1.16. This is the worst minor version changes I have seen ever in Minecraft. It is ridiculous. It's crazy. Like each one of those, if it were just about the code, each one of those could have been another major version. But regardless, we're going to be fine. We're going to go through this. This is also the reason. Listen, if anyone has made it to this point, okay, like 36 minutes in or whatever it is, maybe now you know why I told you not to update, okay? If you're already in, listen, it's sunken cost fallacy. You can still stop. You can still stop and go back, okay? I'm telling you. Okay, the Tomahawk item changes to the interaction result right here of nothing, just an interaction result. And that's going to be returning the interaction result of success in this case. And once again, Control-Alt-O to change this up. The issue here, we're going to change really right now because we're going to go to the mod armor materials. And that one is going to be copied over in its entirety. This class, luckily, it has actually significantly changed to the better because this is now it. Much better, much easier. We can see that we're now making a new armor material over here with all of the different values here. One thing that we do want to add is the bismuth repairable, and we're just going to make sure that this is also all set up properly in the tag provider, just so that we have this. It's just going to be bismuth right here. So basically that we can use bismuth to repair this armor, this type of armor. Awesome. That will also fix this, as I said. There you go. And then creative mode tabs, nothing. Food properties has changed as well, although the change is actually not that bad. There's no longer an effect because the effects now work via a consumable. So inside the same class, we're going to make a public static final consumable. This is now a type of, I guess, a type of component that can be added to items to make them consumable. And this is going to be the radish underscore effect equal to consumables dot default food dot on consume. And then here we make a new apply status effect on consume effect with a new mob effect instance, mob effects dot health boost. And this is going to be duration 400 with a 0.35 of F, and then after the second closing parentheses, a dot build, and there we go. And instead of the effect over here, we can just call the dot build, and there we go. We're gonna have to do this in the actual mod items class to add the consumable effect as well. Although I do like the consumable effect because it allows you to basically add in this on consume any consume effect. So you could just implement this interface and you can do whatever you basically want, which is pretty cool. There's also different ones: teleport randomly, apply status effect, remove status effect, clear all status effect, place sound consume effect. And in theory, you could also add your own custom like consume effects. So when a food is consumed, something that you would just want to have happen happens, which is pretty freaking neat. Like, I really like that. That's a pretty cool idea. Fast has also gone. I don't know how to add it or not add it, but that has just disappeared. And then this is no longer a dot build. Excuse me. Okay. I don't know why it didn't work before, but okay. Sometimes there's mysteries that are so deep that we can't even comprehend them. All right, that's gonna be the food, and then oh boy, off to the mod items. Luckily though, the mod items, similarly to what we've seen previously, can be changed, quote unquote, simply. And with simply, I mean we're going to take the register method and replace it with the register item method. There we go. And we're once again going to go through individually because there are going to be a couple of examples where we shouldn't do this. Namely, I think the last one right here, and that's going to be the register method and the items.register. So that's quite important that we don't change those, except, or rather, everything else can be changed to that. And then here, we actually take in a different way. Okay, so here, what we want to do is the first parameter is still the name. The second parameter now is going to be item, in this case, item quote unquote new. So a new item. Let's see a different way to do this in a second. And then the last parameter is going to be new item properties. In this case, because there is nothing added to the item properties and it is a normal item, right? So that's why we can do this, because that's basically the way that this is set up. So we're going to do the same thing here. This is the item quote unquote new, and then new properties. Beautiful. That's going to be that. And then we have the chisel. This is going to be a similar type of thing where we can actually just make a chisel item new, and then the new item properties. And you can see we can basically pass in to those new item properties whatever item properties we want, because in this case we have the chisel item doesn't take anything other specific into it. But if it does, then it might be more complicated. There's a secondary way that we can do this, and that is we can literally just put in the properties right here inside of the parentheses again, and then we want to, instead of new item properties, we then want to use that. You can do either one of them. I do like the one with the properties more. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same trick that we've done previously in the with the blocks class, and that's going to be we're going to replace the parentheses that are empty with parentheses with properties inside of them. And once again, we're going to do it one by one though, because I do think that is a good idea, even though we wouldn't have to have done that, but that's going to be okay. So we have that, and then we can see, so this is fine, this is okay. Then the next one is the frost ice. This is going to be new properties. We have to change those now to the properties in the parentheses, very important. So any new properties over here, we can now also basically select those and change them to properties. So we're going to do that, and we'll see probably a couple of issues, but that's going to be fine. That's going to be okay. Let's just go through, and there we go. And there we go. So the first thing here is the solid ashes. We can replace that with a lambda, so we can see literally just new item properties, or new item rather. That's it. Awesome. Then we're going to we're going to do the swords and stuff like that immediately. So they changed the tools again, and they're going to keep changing the tools because they don't. Listen, okay. I'm just not going to say anything, okay? So instead of these attributes right here, we once again are actually going back to the thing that we had before, and that's going to be inside of the constructor itself. And we no longer need the attributes. I actually think, yeah. So basically, literally, we're just going to delete all of this except the properties. So we're just going to take the two numbers over here and add them after the mod tool, and then literally just stick it with that. That's it. That's it. Mod tool tiers. Oh, we have to do that as well because that's another class. We're going to do that in a second. So we're going to, once again, like I said, after the tool tier, and then just do this. And then finally, once again, the X over here, and do the same thing. And then do this, and do this, and do this, and do this again and again. I hope that you don't have 20 different tools. Otherwise, like 20 different tool types. Good luck with that one. That's gonna be a fun afternoon. Yeah. Then for the tool tiers, it is actually as easy as calling this the material tool material. Actually, there you go. Tool material is no longer a simple tool. It is a tool material. And the last parameter is going to be a tag. So this is going to be mod tags.items.bismuth repairable. Literally the same thing that we've added previously. Awesome. This fixes all of the issues, and we can proceed to the armor. The armor now, instead of an armor item.type, is now the armor type. So this is going to be armor type, that helmet. So what we can do is we can select armor item.type and simply replace all of those with whatever type there is. And funnily enough, that does all of it. However, the durability, if I recall correctly, we don't even need to call the durability anymore. I think that is now done automatically. Yes, it is. So basically, this durability thing with the get durability, we can just delete all of this and literally just put in the properties like that. So yeah, they decided once again that that was not a smart way to do it, and they're now doing it in a better and smarter way before they change it up again, because it also wasn't a smart way. All right. So we're going to have mod items, and this is going to be the horse armor now changes to the equestrian is fine. We just don't have any false anymore. So just properties, that's going to be fine. Kaupenjoe template, we can replace this whole crazy thing with literally just this smithing template, create armor trim template. And then this is no longer the case. These are now block items. So this is a block item. This is a block item. And this is going to be a spawn egg item with gecko.get in this case. And that's going to be okay. And the radish seeds are going to be changed. No, they are not. That's going to be fine. The goji berries are changed though, because this now also, the food has a consumable, and that consumable is mod food properties radish effect. Oh, okay, I guess that should be added to the radish instead of the goji berries, but okay, that's fine. So basically in the food over here, you can see you can add the proper food properties as well as the effect over here, the consumable effect. And that's going to be it. That's all of the items. Like I said, best take a look at the GitHub repository link down below. And there we go. We're almost done. The loot, I think, should just work. Particles, I think they should just work. Mod potions. This now requires a name as its first parameter, question mark. Slimy potion. It does. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Recipes. Of course, the recipes. So the recipes have changed just the tiniest bit. Get ingredients, we can just make this non-overwrite. That's fine. And then the question is, what has changed? Well, really, the recipe serializer and the recipe type over here, they now just need to be extending from recipe of type growth chamber recipe input. And the same thing happens in the get type over here. It just needs, the question mark just needs to extend from exactly that. The get result item and the craft in dimensions no longer exist, so we can delete both of those. And this codec non-empty has changed to codec. And there is, oh yeah, and also we want to hover over this to implement two more methods. That's the placement info and the recipe book category. This is for adding this recipe to a recipe book. I'm going to say placement info .create, passing in the input item, and then here this is going to be the recipe book categories crafting miscellaneous. I don't know if this is actually going to add it to the recipe book. I actually did not check this. It might, and it might also need to be changed. I'm not sure. However, this is definitely going to work. The recipe input is going to be fine, and the mod recipes is also fine. And we continue to the screens. The menu, fine. Screen, however, not fine. Interestingly enough, in the screen, I believe we can literally just get rid of the entire render thing right here because we are no longer needed. And then the blit, we now need to also provide the texture size by default. So there's going to be 256 for this. Yes, but also the first parameter will change to render type dot GUI textured. The same thing in the blit down below. GUI type texture rendered, and then we actually don't need to add anything. Wait, do we need to add this or not? Yes, we do. Okay, we're all good. We're all good because here the texture is already added because the default size is 256 by 256, but we now need to explicitly tell it that. Awesome. Same thing here. We can just delete all three of those. This is the render type GUI textured, and then of course 256. Once again, the texture width and height here refers to the size of the image. So if I go to GUI, pedestal GUI, and see this is 256 by 256, while the size of the inventory obviously is like 176 by 164 or something like that, right? But the entire image is 256 by 256. So those are two different things. That's why we have to specify that as well. Awesome. That is going mod menu types, nothing. Sound, I think, is all fine. Trim materials, yes. Believe it just changed its position. So literally just re-import bootstrap context trim material. Awesome. Same thing with the trim pattern, I think. Yep, they just changed its location, trim pattern, and that is going to be fine. Util item properties, luckily still there, although not for very longer. I think in 0.5 they are completely gone. So you can already prepare for that mentally. Then the tree is fine, biomodifier is fine, configured features fine, placement fine. All of this is fine. Config we haven't even touched, so that's going to be okay. Even though there is actually an error in there, and that's going to be this one apparently. Okay, we're just going to delete that because we're not using the config right now. I'm not doing the configs. We're fine for the time being. That's everything in the code, but do you believe in magic? Because we're not done yet, because we also need to change things in the assets. It starts with, oh man, I actually think it starts with this. Let me double check this. I don't know if I've actually changed this or if I have to change this. Well, let's continue first of all with the rest. And the rest is the models slash things for, the models slash armor stuff. So this happens in tutorial mod, models. We now need another folder right here called equipment. And that I'm going to copy over the JSON file over here. This is the JSON file for the horse bismuth, the horse armor for bismuth, the humanoid armor, and the humanoid leggings. And those are now going into textures, entity, and then here we need to make a new directory called equipment. And inside of there, we're going to have the basically the horse underscore body. So that's going to be the name right here. Awesome. And then the horse armor right here, that's going to be moved into here, but we're going to call this bismuth. There you go. So no, that's not quite what I had in mind, but okay. Actually going to move into this, and not the folder is called bismuth, but the name is here bismuth. There you go. So basically you can see horse underscore body, bismuth, bismuth. That's how this connects. And I think you should now also sort of very easily see what the other ones are going to be called. This is humanoid. And then this is also going to be bismuth. This texture is from models. This is the layer 1. We're going to call this, factor it. There you go. And this is going to be bismuth. And then we have in the equipment folder, the humanoid underscore leggings. And this is bismuth layer 2, which we will also be renaming to bismuth. Once again, you can of course change the names right here, which would then change the names of the PNGs that it points to. I think that should be more or less self-explanatory if you're even still watching this. Listen, someone is probably still watching this. And then they're saying, okay, you know what, Kaupenjoe, I think you were right. Of course I was. Of course I was. Similar thing happens in the entities, actually, in the models right here. This changes to trims. And then this changes to entity. And then the armor changes to humanoid. And then into the entity folder, another one called humanoid underscore leggings. And that's where the Kaupen leggings go. However, I'm pretty sure they will be renamed as well. Yeah, they will be renamed to Kaupen. There we go. Color palette is fine. And the armor trims have changed as well. So you can basically see that we now have the trim over here under trims color palette bismuth. That stays the same. However, here we have trims entity humanoid Kaupen and trims entity humanoid underscore leggings Kaupen. So that is basically the change here, so that it actually points to the right textures. I think, though, that is going to be everything that we need. I believe this should now work. And I think that's also, 55 minutes, let's say, ish. I think that's fine. What we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, run data gen so that it generates the recipes new and stuff like that if it needs to. I believe there is a change in the recipes. Although I'll double check that in just a second. And there we go. So the config file over here doesn't work anymore. That's going to be okay. We can literally just delete it anyway. Most of you probably don't even have the config file anymore because I did tell you to delete it. So we're going to be fine. We don't need this because it's not necessary as of right now. Rerunning data gen, we get another error. That's totally fine. And that's going to be for the registration event. 4 errors are found. Absolutely no worries. We have those. And let's take a look. Block ID is not set for the bloodwood log, the pedestal, and the chair. So we have probably made a little bit of an error over here. So we can take a look at the, first of all, the log and the, pedestal and the chair. All right. So the log over here, yes, indeed, look at this, right? So you can see block behavior properties of full copy. So that does not work like I have previously said. This needs to have the properties from the function over here. Let me double check in my notes over here. And indeed, that I already have. So we're going to just take this and you can see this is, of course, available to you as well in the GitHub repository. So we can just copy those over. I think those are all the same, right? I'm pretty sure they are. That's going to be awesome. There you go. And finally, there you go. That's going to be awesome. This is all just cherry wood and in terms of the sound, bass, and then ignited by lava. The next one is the pedestal. The pedestal. I think those are errors that don't actually exist, if I recall correctly. There was something there. I think those are, for some reason, they're just shown. Let me just do the data. I have seen that error before. I have the exact same error when I pre-programmed this for some reason. And I'm not 100% sure why that happens. Yeah, so for some reason it happens because the one thing here doesn't work and then it shows another one. Really strange. But as you can see, 40 new written files. Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. I don't even know where exactly all of those are, but I guess they are there. They are somewhere in data, I guess, maybe. Yeah, probably the stuff here. I think there's something changed there. Like I said, something has changed in the recipes. Let me double check over here. These are our custom recipes. Yes, and what has changed is actually quite significant. So the ingredient over here is no longer an object, meaning that the ingredient, if you have a single ingredient, you want to do it like this. You just want to give it a name and then a comma. So that's very important. Otherwise, our custom JSON files, our custom recipes here will also no longer work. So we want to change this from an object to basically just being the name over here. So ingredient and the name of the item. And there we go. I don't know quite why that is the case, but that's going to be okay. We're going to do it, and that's fine. And now I believe we have everything we need. So, you know, it's just a cool hour after having done this about 3 times already. So, you know, that's nothing too bad. So let's see if we run the client over here, if we can join the world, and if more or less everything works. Let's take a look. For the sake of argument, we're going to make a new world, and let's take a look. All right, here we are, and let's see. Look at this. So we have almost everything. I don't even know. Did I add a radiation staff? Was this a thing that I added? I can't even remember. Listen, there was a lot of tutorials. So we can see that when I throw this, there is a little bit of issue here. Okay, that's fair. The gecko, however, is going to crash the game. So that's a very good sign. Let's take a look. So this is also why you test stuff like this. The reason is oh yes, of course, the attributes. So for all of your different gecko or whatever entities, you now have one more attribute that you have to add. And this is the follow range. Otherwise, sorry, that's not the follow range. It's the tempt range. So it is the attributes.tempt range. In this case, we're going to do 16. This is for the tempt goal right here. Apparently, it has a tempt range that it needs. So how far away can you do this? It makes sense to have this, you know, written somewhere. I feel like you could have probably also just added it to the tempt goal as another thing. But, you know, that is neither here nor there. And once we have that, I think then we can continue again. There we go. See, now they all work, and we can even get some babies in here. So everything works kind of like we expect it to. We even get the boss bar still, which is pretty funny. And anything else, let's see over here, just for the sake of argument, a couple of those blocks right here, maybe the magic block. So if we have the pedestal, we can put something on there. You can access it as well. There we go. We can turn this on and off. Nice. The growth chamber with a stick, I believe, if I recall correctly, we should get some end rods. That should work as well. The fence is over here. They're still connecting. Things like that also work. The chisel should still work. The radish we can eat. We can indeed. And with the chisel, we should be able to. Boop, boop, boop. See, we can change this. Awesome. We get some end rods. We can put the armor on, although there might be some issues. No, they're not. Let's go. Okay, there's no issues. However, we're not getting the effect. As I've said, something with the effect just does not work for some reason. I don't know. It's going to work again in the next version, and then it's not going to work again after that. So that's really, that's amazing, isn't it? That's really awesome. But yeah, that is going to be an update. I would say mostly working. Like I said, there's going to be some things that are not going to work. I highly recommend you check out the NeoForge, you know, basically the whole, like, set up the primer and stuff like that for you to update if you really do need to update and want to update. If you have made it this far, I would really appreciate any sort of comment in the comments below. Just comment, I don't know, like Kaupenjoe or something like that. Like, just literally just like Kaupenjoe, okay? Just like that. And then anyone who hasn't made it here, is very confused, but also I know that roughly, the 3 people who have actually watched for this entire freaking hour, you have incredible stamina, and hope you're already prepared for the next hour when we get to 1.21.4. Yeah. Anyway, that is how to update to 1.21.3. Yeah, that's going to be it for this tutorial right here. I know we have made it in record time. Absolutely fantastic. I genuinely hope you found this useful though, and you were able to update your mod with this, and I will see you next time in this video when we are going to update to 1.21.4. Until then, so yeah.